Greetings from Mobility Outlook and welcome to Women in Mobility. Our guest for today's episode is Ms. Renuka Srinivasan, Sales Director, Simulia, Dassault Systems. Renuka spearheads the Simulia business in India, bringing a wealth of expertise to the forefront. Prior to this, she held the position of Worldwide Service Director for Simulia, showcasing her global perspective and leadership. With an impressive career spanning over 25 years in the simulation or computer-aided engineering business, Renuka played a pivotal role in establishing the Abaqus business in India. Her experience cuts across diverse industries, including automotive, aerospace, defense, industrial equipment manufacturing, civil engineering, and engineering services providers, among others. Her professional journey led to her Hibbitt, Karlsson and Sorensen Inc. in the USA before she returned to India to set up Abaqus business. In this capacity, she took charge of pre-sales and post-sales technical activities along with driving business development initiatives for India. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Renuka Srinivasan to the show. Renuka, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the chance to chat with me.
What made you to look at civil engineering given its male-dominated nature?
Right. So I actually come from a family of perhaps civil engineers. Both my grandfathers are civil engineers. My dad and uncle are. And so I think my family, we own a construction business. Mm-hmm. So growing up, I've always spent time on maybe a construction site, and I've been around civil engineers. So for me, it seemed like a natural progression. Mm-hmm. And that's how I actually came into civil engineering. My father did try to dissuade me. I remember he took me to a site to kind of even more, on the perhaps a hot day, and said, you've got to be out here standing. But it was something that I had always seen them do. Mm-hmm. And it was something that, I did want to take up. And I think going through the studies, I've never regretted that choice.
I think after civil engineering, you did your master's in structural mechanics.
Right.
What attracted you to simulation?
Sure. So I think in my about final year in civil engineering in undergrad, I took up a course which was on finite element analysis. Mm-hmm. And later we also did a project within the campus, of course, related to design of, I think it was an overhead water tank, in automating the whole process. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoyed that of all the courses that I had done. Mm-hmm. And so I, felt that was something I wanted to try. I then worked for a year at Engineers India. And over there as well, besides just the manual design, I could also see the impact of, the finite element analysis and the way it was automated. And I think all of that helped reinforce for me that this is what I wanted to do. And therefore, for my master's, that was the field that I took.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about your first job. How was your experience?
Okay. So I think my first job at Engineers India, I was there for a year, little just before, I was more a trainee engineer. It was interesting because they had just opened the Chennai center. So this was a smaller setup, which I was happy because I think in a smaller setup, you are, more used to talking with people, getting the, maybe the attention of seniors, etc. So for me, it was interesting to work in the field. Certainly, there are only a few women within, especially the design field. But it was nice to get that exposure and understand how engineering is applied in the real world.
You had any mentor during
that time? Certainly, I think my direct manager over there, he actually did take time to ensure that I understood some of the ways, you make a lot of mistakes coming in straight from field. I remember when I designed a truss, you kind of optimized it. And so I optimized it so every member was of a different size. And then he, explained to me that this is great in theory, but in practice, you cannot manufacture something like this.
Okay.
But I think having people like that helped us in understanding the impact of what we're doing in manufacturing and the real, world, as opposed to the bookish knowledge you come with.
Correct.
So that certainly helped.
Theory and practice completely different.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
So that is the thing. And how you adapt maybe what you're trying to do in theory to actually the end of the line manufacturing and then operation. So that kind of helped.
Yeah. Now that you are in software-oriented organization where you have a lot of women colleagues, but your clientele, like automotive, aviation, industrial engineering, civil, most of them seem to be a male-dominated industrial segment. How has been your experience, talking to them because you are in sales?
Sure. So I would say that perhaps today especially we see a lot more women. But certainly when I started my career, that was not necessarily the case. I would say that in India, I don't think there is any kind of overt maybe discrimination as such. But perhaps it is more subconscious or maybe other subtle things. So both, I would say, not just for the clients, but even for us. So for me, for instance, I worked in the US after my master's, then I came back and I started the operations here. So when I came back to India, while people knew our software, we did not know people beyond a few clients. So I would go to conferences and then you have to introduce yourself to find out that, okay, you know this tire company or this automotive company could be a potential client. But you go to a conference where maybe, less than 5% of the audience is women.
Yeah.
Most of the people you need to meet are men. And I think at 28, I was a little hesitant to go try to meet the senior person, introduce yourself. And, a lot of times when a senior person comes off, his own organization people are there. There are people from the audience who want to ask questions. Almost all of them are men, and you kind of have to fight your way through this crowd to also give your card and say, hey, this is, this is what I do, and maybe the software will be useful to you. So for me also, initially I would stand back, and then I realized if I stood back, I would never get my chance. So you will also have to go through that crowd.
Absolutely.
So some of those kind of things which are even our own mental perceptions. And of course, from the other side as well, I mean, one other thing, for instance, is when I taught at R&D organization, they were set up in a factory. And it's a little embarrassing, but when I had to use the restroom, there were no ladies' toilets. So then I had to walk right across the factory to, the administrative block, which is where the corporate sat, and use, So it was a little embarrassing because the first day, halfway through the class, you cut right across. Of course, they also then made some alternate arrangements. But, when you're talking about the ratio of women to men, the very fact that there is no ladies' toilet in that building itself attests to, what is there. Things have changed a lot, I would say, between then and now. And you certainly, would not encounter such situations today.
You said about the mental block that any women have. How did you overcome those mental blocks?
I think, it takes time because you realize you have to go forward. And I think basically there is no alternative. I had come back, I was setting up a business in India, and the only way forward is to speak, fight your way through the crowd and speak to these people. And you do hesitate a little bit, but at some point you realize this is what you have to do. But it does take some time and a little bit of stealing each time that this is something you need to do. And I think the only thing is once you've done it a few times, you also realize it's not that bad. And I think also in India, culturally, people do help out. So once they notice you are there in the crowd, they also speak to you. But it is, like you said, more our own mental thing also sometimes.
But when you step into the leadership role, what were your initial thoughts? Are there any key moments that you can share?
Sure. So for me, I think one of the key moments I would say was, earlier I had been a technical engineer, working, of course, under a manager doing tech support. When I came back to India, it was more of a entrepreneurial journey because I set up the whole operations here in India. And we had worked out a business plan with the owner of the company HKS that I worked with. And the thing for me, one key thing was, we had planned to add people maybe in our second or third year because I was doing everything. I was the technical engineer, I was the salesperson, I was also office admin, But the business took off very well and I needed to advance the hiring earlier. When I spoke with the owner during a review saying that, hey, I want to advance what we had put in the plan. One of his points was, he said, so do you need more money from me? Why are you asking this? I said, no, we are earning enough. So I need to advance it. Then he said, look, I'm here for advice, but I pay you to take the decisions. And for me, that statement was very powerful, that I am paid to actually take decisions. And he said, yes, if you need guidance, you have a doubt, we are there, But otherwise, so for me, it was very empowering. And I think I try to pass it on to my team as well, that it is our job to take as much of the decisions as we can. And then, only the ones where we need help actually has to percolate up. But otherwise, so for me, that is a very key moment, I would say.
Very good, very good. So how did the team react to this when you wanted to take them, the owners, for what they do? Or
I think that it takes time to get used to. I would say it takes more time for people who've worked in other organizations. What I've seen is with people who've come fresh out of college, worked in our organization, because we've always had that culture that, feel free to take a decision. You kind of know what we want to do. Yes, if something is, of course, you want to keep an eye on the legal aspect, you want to keep an eye on the business, but take the best decision you can. They were used to it. People who came sometimes from other organizations took a little more time because they had been perhaps in organizations where a lot more approvals were needed. But once they realized, I think they also like it, and I'm happy to see that those managers have then passed this on to their juniors as well, and so it becomes a culture.
You have already empowered the team, comprising of men, women. So specific to women, what are your thoughts on empowering women?
To help them as such. I think, for empowering women, I would say one of the key things is helping them gain self-confidence. Not that they are not confident, but one of the things, and even I'm guilty of it sometimes, is, if there is a role, let's say a higher role, or there is a different maybe project to take on, I think studies have shown that men typically raise their hand even if they feel, let's say it's a job role, that they have only, say, 40% of the skills required. Women want to have 100% of the skills before they will apply for a role. Whereas, in most roles, of course, you expect that someone comes in and grows into the role. So I think for women especially, it is to encourage them to perhaps take that challenge.
So they take the barrier.
Yes, so that they shouldn't think, okay, I have to be 100% certain I have all the skills. Because, when you get promoted, you pick up some new things, right? The organization also helps you. It is newer responsibility, maybe a greater responsibility. So you will also pick up some of what is needed when you go into that role. And I think encouraging women to raise their hand and come there, and that there will be a support system is important. And giving them that support system is also important. I think the other thing is mentorship. Mentoring them, both men and women, of course, but maybe women especially for certain roles, to groom them to come up and take those kind of leadership roles becomes important.
Yeah. So for many organizations, irrespective of the segment that they are operating in, they are, their hands are tied, when it comes to, giving leadership positions to women. What, according to you, are the reasons?
Okay. So I would would say that as an organization, there should really not be barriers for them. And if there are, it is more that they need to work towards it. First, of course, is the availability of women who have the right skills to come to that leadership position, which means that right from a junior role, you need to encourage the women so that you have a pipeline of women ready to take on these leadership roles, right? And if you don't have it in your organization, then you need to be willing to look outside in the industry to find a woman. Certainly organizations should aim to start young, and groom them up, right? Okay. And that comes through mentorship, it comes through giving them exposure to different aspects of that leadership role, and maybe also working with the women to understand what could be barriers. For instance, is it, today most women travel, but is this an issue? Is it, so they also need to understand within their industry what are the aspects which, if anything, are impacting women and how can they address it. But to me, I think from an organization viewpoint, I don't think they're tied. I think what they really need to do is create that pipeline by starting young and helping them, move at each level.
Okay, creating a pipeline for them to go. That's
to have a choice of women for those leadership roles, So that is the thing.
So the mobility industry is moving towards, the sustainability. New mobility is being talked about in many segments, and use of ML, AI, that's prevalent, and then you are also working on it. Do you see these new technologies giving opportunities for women more than what it used to be?
Sure. So I think certainly, like any technology, there's both good and bad. Of course, in our country, historically, you see more people, women in computer science. Somehow that's considered more of a woman's job than maybe manufacturing. So I hope more women will choose data science because, data science, especially if you take AI/ML, it's working on maybe some level of historic data, certain algorithms which use past data. Past data is unfortunately biased, either consciously or unconsciously. If it looks at the number of maybe police officers, it will find that there are more men police officers than women, right? So in any segment, the history is going by the fact that there is already a gender skew. And so one of the things is to ensure AI/ML, when those algorithms come out, that it is inherently taking care of some of the gender bias that may come out of its training material. If that kind of a thing happens, then hopefully the thing will be that when you're looking at hiring, will an AI or ML algorithm be better at being gender blind and only looking at the skills? If that is possible, then yes, there is something there for women. Certainly, similarly, there's a lot of talk about pay gaps between men and women. So if you have something where the promotions or the raises are maybe also vetted through these kind of things, will it help? These are some aspects. Of course, the other, if we look at the downside sometimes of AI/ML, they say a lot of the AI/ML might go first towards tasks that can be easily automated. Maybe, for instance, in an organization, it might be more things related to technical support or, answering customer care questions. Today we already have certain chatbots. Historically, women have been perhaps more in those roles, whereas maybe something like sales, especially enterprise level sales, may not be something that AI immediately goes after. And those unfortunately tend to be more male dominated, segments within a company. So there is both good and bad, but I do hope more women will choose data science as a career so that they can also influence these algorithms.
That's right. You have a lot of travel, extended meetings and whatnot. Professional responsibilities there and personal. How do you manage?
It is difficult. I think at each level you kind of have to find a way. You also have to perhaps realize that there will always be some deadlines when professionally you have to put in the extra hours, and so that does happen. I think in India especially we are very lucky because family is also used to the concept of helping. You know, we culturally live in maybe extended families. There is help from that. There is also the fact that we can afford help. You know, I think without that it would be impossible. I do travel. I'm lucky enough to have a live-in babysitter, you know, who is there to kind of help, and that is what allows the freedom of being able to, you know, travel with the idea that the spouse also has a support system in place. But you're right. I think that takes one aspect. The other aspect is, of course, the guilt that I think women perhaps disproportionately feel. You always feel that guilt that you're, you know, leaving a child or a parent. It's not just child care. Sometimes there is elder parent care that both men and women have to go through. But for me, I think it's never 50-50. Technology is both good and bad. You can work from home. I used to work from the hospital when my mom was, you know, hospitalized. On the other hand, it does mean that whether it is 9 p.m. or 10 p.m., you
there's a low limit.
Correct. So I think each person has to find the balance, and certainly I think I at least try to keep some of my weekends free and my early mornings free to spend time with my child, and you know, that's how it is. So,
what are your hobbies?
Okay. So hobbies-wise, I swim. I run 5 to 10 kilometers, so it's more related to health, and you know,
every day.
I run alternate days. On the other days I walk my dog, but yes, so that's what I do. And earlier I've done a couple of small triathlons. Now not so much. Hopefully I'll get back to it. My son cycles, so I now like to cycle with him. So these are typically the things I do. I do a little bit of gardening and some baking.
Great. Renuka, it was wonderful talking to you.
Same. Yeah.
Thank you for talking to Mobility Outlook and being part of Women in Mobility. Thanks.
Thanks. It was a great honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.